of the owners, Christopher and Gillian Foster, or their teenage daughter, Kirsty.
Can you imagine? Your family's in his house. Where are they? I mean, we were ringing and ringing and the phone just stripped onto the answer machine. There's no answer.
There was talk of an £11 million Russian business deal.
They didn't know whether they had done a runner. And my thoughts were, even if I never see them again, at least they'll be alive.
We got shots fired on the front drive. The dogs were shot. The horses were shot. This is real unusual stuff.
I knew my brother very well, probably better than anybody else. He was very charismatic, very personable with people. But Chris could have a darker side.
When we first arrived here, we realised that someone's trying to tell you something.
In the days that followed, the burnt-out ruins of Osbaston House began to give up its secrets.
I think there's secrets in all families.
I had a phone call from a friend of mine to say that he didn't know whether I would be able to get there because there had been a fire, which they think was at Osbaston House. So I said, if they've got a fire, we'll go and help. And there were police sort of at both ends of the lanes. I got out to explain, who I was. Well, firstly, I do all the cleaning. Do you know why you're here with me this afternoon? Christian and Kirsty missing. And that's all I know at the moment.
12 fire crews arrived at Osbaston House that morning to fight the huge fire. The gates were deliberately blocked by a horse box. Its tyres had been shot out.
It felt like it could have been an organised reprisal type situation. We didn't know where the family were at that moment in time. They could have been in the house, they could have been away some, they could have been kidnapped. You could imagine that because of the activity that had gone on.
I mean, they didn't behave any differently. They didn't seem any different on Friday than they would normally be. I mean, Chris was in a cheerful mood. They were all larking around.
3 days after Belinda Father's last cleaned it, the Foster's family home was completely destroyed. Senior forensic investigator Paul Beaton was one of the first to the scene.
When we first arrived here, within very few minutes, we realised the extent of the damage. Everybody said this as being someone's making a statement here rather than a straightforward fire or a murder or some sort of action like that.
The fact that the house had been burnt down, the family was missing, the horses had been killed, the dogs were missing, and in the kennel area there was blood staining and dripping which was leading towards the stable block. This is real unusual stuff.
So we've got some stables. How many horses?
In the first two here, there would be Rowley and Lottie.
Chris and Jill Foster and daughter Kirsty had moved into Osbaston House 5 years earlier. With 16 acres of Shropshire countryside for their horses and dogs, it was an idyllic place to live.
They were a loving family. There were the three of them. They all loved each other. They had a happy time wherever they went.
An investigation into the fire, which is believed to have been started deliberately, has been launched. Christopher Foster, his wife Gillian and teenage daughter Kirsty remain unaccounted for. Police are hoping the house will be deemed safe for a search at some point in the next few days.
That bank holiday weekend, the Fosters had asked Chris's mum to stay. They were all invited to a neighbour's shooting party and barbecue.
Jill rang me and she said, "Are you coming for the weekend? There's the Hughes' barbecue, as usual, on August Bank Holiday Monday." And I just said, I said, "It sounds as though, you're going to have a busy weekend. I'll stay here." And that was the last time that I spoke to her.
That Tuesday, Enid was visiting Warwick Castle with her youngest son Andrew. It wasn't until 7 p.m. that evening that the police finally managed to tell her news about the fire.
I thought it had happened during the day, and being old property, I wondered if it was an electrical fire that had started with some old wiring or something like that. When she said it had happened in the early hours of Tuesday morning, and it has been deliberately set on fire, and then of course your whole concept of everything changes.
The mystery of the missing Foster family gripped the nation. A 200-strong major incident team was called in to investigate, led by Detective Superintendent John Groves.
Mr. Foster had been a successful businessman, but in the recent past he'd been subject of various court actions and charges against both him and his property. So he very quickly realised that he was in some significant financial difficulty.
I really thought he'd either bought a boat or just got on a plane and disappeared to wherever all of them had.
Despite a countrywide appeal, national headlines and numerous reported sightings home and abroad, there was still no trace of the Foster family.
You know, I knew in the bottom of my heart that they were inside. Jill is a total animal lover, so is Kirsty, and Chris loves the animals. So if the dogs and the animals are there, then yes, they're definitely there.
3 days after the fire, forensic investigators entered the smoking ruins. Dominic Black was the first in.
Whilst I'm going around taking photographs, there's an area just in front of the fireplace where I step on something spongy. It feels spongy, different to the rest of the rubble. So we started the process of removing and exposing what we thought was human remains, which it was. As we exposed body one, we got to the point where we could lift the main part of it. It certainly wasn't a complete body, and as we did, we found the second body directly below it. Teeth were very important to us at that point. Initially I thought it was perhaps mother and daughter because of the size of the skeletons, really. But body one and body two were soon identified as being Chris and Jill. The cause of death for Jill was quite apparent. She was shot in the head.
We believe that it was a very close range shot to the back of the head. It would have killed her instantaneously.
In an early breakthrough, a .22 caliber rifle was dug up beside the two bodies. The house security system is also found to have survived the fire.
At this point, I can see the silhouette of a man carrying what looks like a gun, with a silencer on the end of the gun, and this is why I'm thinking this is the man who's responsible for causing the shots at the premises.
2 bodies have been unearthed. Jill Foster had been shot in the head, but her 15-year-old daughter Kirsty Foster was still missing. Osbaston House has burnt to the ground. In the stables, dead horses and dogs are found incinerated. In the ruins, 2 bodies are discovered. Police get their first breakthrough when they recover CCTV footage showing a man setting the fire carrying a rifle.
And they took me down to Starport to look at that CCTV. They showed me just coming from the stables to the corner of the house and asked me, out of 10, could I say whether I thought it was Christopher or not? And I said 5. Perhaps because I didn't want it to be, but I wasn't sure.
Very clearly this footage very powerfully depicts Mr. Foster's actions on that particular night, preparing to set fire to his premises. He's also walking around with that gun and silencer, and of course we know that his gun was used to kill Jill.
My worst nightmares are that just before that split second before he shot Jill, that Jill sensed him there or woke up and knew what was happening.
The police are searching for a third person, 15-year-old Kirsty Foster. She hadn't been seen since the barbecue on Monday night.
Now we have Kirsty Foster on Breezy riding folio.
She was the first foster girl for 65 years. And here she is sailing over. Oh, look at her.
Well done, that was an important round, that team, a member down.
Used to frighten me to death. I used to close my eyes when I watched her go sailing over there. These were off a camera that they found in the horse lorry. Chris took them. He always went down to what they call the river paddocks where she had these jumps. He always went down to be with her, so she was never on her own. He absolutely adored her, and she adored him.
When they couldn't find Kirsty, we prayed that Kirsty managed to get away.
6 days after the fire, police investigators discover a third body.
Experts found what they believe to be further human remains early yesterday evening. A Home Office pathologist attended the scene and confirmed the remains were human late last night.
She must have been in bed at the time of the fire, and the only reason for her to be still in bed, she must have been dead before the fire started. Otherwise, she would have tried to escape.
She was parallel with the back wall, but 2 flights up, and her bed position would have been against that same wall. Everything had dropped down through 2 bedrooms into this debris pile. She was a child, 15. She was innocent, and she's got all her life in front of her. Her remains were really fragile, extremely fragile, and we couldn't use metal tools to recover Kirsty. We were using brushes, gently brushing, all the time, trying to expose more and more to the point where we could move her. To the waiting hearse and the 2 suited undertakers were stood there. I haven't had a moment like that in 22 years of scenes of crime work, and I looked at the other officers, and they appeared sad as well. Just had 5 minutes really, just to contemplate that.
Detectives investigating the arson and murders at Osbaston House, Maysbrook, in the early hours of August the 26th, believe that Jill and Kirsty Foster were killed by Christopher Foster. We believe Mr. Foster took his own life after setting the house alight.
It upsets me that I shall never see her, you know, grow. So she's never, forever now going to be like that. To me, isn't she? So they've gone. That's it, isn't it? So you're just left with photographs. Memories, aren't you?
No, it's what's been taken away from her that I find the most difficult thing to come to terms with. She wasn't given that choice. There was no questions asked, it was just taken away, the pull of a trigger.
He shot my sister and Kirsty. And there's no words to describe what sort of person he is.
Why it's happened is important to me, because that just wasn't Chris, you know.
For the investigation team, the answers to why Jill and Kirsty were murdered lie hidden in the ruins of Chris Foster's life.
Christopher Foster holding Kirsty. Probably the happiest day of his life, I would think.
There was probably a dozen, cards that were on the mantelpiece from friends and family. I mean, I don't think he was bothered by the fact that he was, that he was 50.
Clearly Kirsty had a passion for shopping, born to shop. Friends like you make life fun. Kirsty happy 15th birthday, celebrate in style and have a wonderful birthday with lots of love. Love Mum and Dad.
When I actually saw him last was when I'd been there for a few days when it was Kirsty's 15th birthday. He just said, "See you, Mum," as I was driving away, and that was it. No indication whatsoever.
It does look like a very strong family bonds with family members. You can see there that Christopher has his arms around Kirsty and very much protecting both Kirsty and his wife there. I don't know whether Mr. Foster was looking through those albums at the time that he was planning and preparing in relation to this fire, but it certainly looks as if that is the case.
They'd had all these photos out and looking at himself as a child. Saw them on the Friday before, and both of them, they said they'd been watching the wedding video and that they'd all started to cry. It did just cross my mind that it was a bit strange. So maybe that was part of the step to ending it. The final look at everybody.
I think everybody would agree with me that Jill looks absolutely superb today, and I was extremely proud standing at the altar when she walked up to me. It was a very moving moment for me. I'd like to say thank you for having me.
Too late now.
It was a commitment to life, really, and you used to say, like, your vows were for...
Till death us do part, really.
For life.
I couldn't wish for a better brother or sister-in-law than Chris and Jill. They are very, very special to me.
Behind the warm words of Andrew Foster's best man speech, the brothers had a very different relationship.
I could never quite understand why he chose me as best man.
And I'd like to wish them all the best for the future.
Once he'd fallen out of you, that was it. There was no compromise.
When Chris was probably about 19 years old, he and Andrew had had words, and Andrew said, "One of these days I'm going to be as big as you," he said, "and I'm going to belt you."
I hadn't had a great deal of contact with him for 16 years. He was a bully. I would describe it as abuse. And that's why we didn't get on it, and that's what I want people to know.
Andrew was a much more sensitive child than Chris. Christopher always wanted to achieve, and that's what he did. And we were very proud of him. Dad used to call him Little Nero.
From an early age, Chris Foster was drawn to fire. He went on to make his fortune from fires and stopping them. It was a fascination that was to eventually consume his whole life. In the late 80s, the Piper Alpha oil rig disaster transfixed him.
I remember seeing it on television and seeing it blazing for days and days, and it evidently got Christopher thinking if the valves could have been turned off, the fire would not have lasted so long.
Chris Foster seized the moment with an invention to prevent a similar disaster. The big oil companies demanded proof that it could withstand such an inferno. So Chris gambled everything on a demonstration fire.
And he stood there with his fingers crossed whilst this fire was blazing, and he knew that when the fire died down and they put it out, if his material had protected the valves, that was it. And it had. And that was Eureka, I suppose. He said that he was making money hand over fist, and he had so much money he didn't know what to do with it.
Soon after his marriage to Jill, Chris Foster's business with the oil pipeline industry boomed, earning his company millions.
Chris and Jill did start moving in much higher circles financially. To come second place wasn't Chris's style. He needed to be there up the front with the winners.
He wanted to have the nice things that perhaps keeping up with the Joneses, really.
I don't think he wanted to know his roots. I don't think he wanted to know my family, basically. He didn't want anything to do with his Wolverhampton roots. He'd created a new life for them, hadn't he? In the country, in a lovely village. You know, and obviously he wanted people to admire him and, you know, look up to him. People in Wolverhampton basically knew what he originally was like.
Chris boasted to friends that he was a multimillionaire. He began spending compulsively and enjoying the attention that having money brought him. There were rumours he was having affairs.
I remember Jill mentioning one time they'd been to a party and there were some people there who I believe were swingers. I think she was a bit shocked by it all, wasn't
she was a bit naive, wasn't she, that way? She was quite naive, really. Lots of things. I mean, I said to Chris, you know, if you throw your kids in with all your posh cars, you'll have all the women after you. You know what I mean? And he laughed, didn't he?
5 years ago, Chris Foster bought Osbaston House for over £1 million, days after his wife Jill had seen it in Shropshire Life magazine.
He did very proudly say, "I haven't got a mortgage, Mum, I've paid cash for it." Well, I was, whew!
They wanted this very idyllic country house, mainly for Kirsty. We feel she'll be safe. We know that she's at home with her passion, which was horses. And he said also we can keep her under our watchful eye.
The transition from working-class boy to country gent was complete. Chris Foster even developed an expensive passion for pheasant shooting.
He loved the shooting, he loved fishing, he just lived for it. Proper big shoot, 400 birds, 300, 500. Yeah, he just loved it. He'd go 4 days a week.
He loved to show you his guns and to see that all handcrafted, that it's art in itself, like. But every time he showed you the guns, it was an investment. Always said, I bought this as an investment.
And had a couple of Purdy guns commissioned, which took 6 months to make, cost 70,000, and also had a Beretta hand purpose made for him, which cost 30,000 as well.
But through his passion for guns and shooting, disturbing aspects of Chris's personality started to emerge.
There was always a gun in the kitchen, and likewise in the dressing room, you know, the gun would be just perched up in the corner by the door. I didn't like to touch them, but I would just move them just to sort of clean behind them. Jill's dads used to go into the barns and you know, mess on his cars, which he didn't like. You know, and if they didn't come out, then they were shot. You know, which Jill didn't like, and I wasn't that keen on it, but it was just Chris. You know, everything had to be done instantly.
Jill could be in tears at times, sat there in tears. Certainly emotionally, he could be very tough to people close to him.
See, what's this?
Chris could be tough on the family pets too. When Kirsty's favourite Labrador, Holly, started pestering sheep, he took immediate action.
They had several black Labrador dogs, and there was one in particular that he couldn't control, and he took it down a country lane and shot it.
Well, I can understand why he couldn't give it away or have it put down by a vet, but it seemed like he wanted to do it himself, like have control over it.
I must admit I was quite surprised that he could take the animal out and shoot it, especially as a pet. You know, it was Kirsty's pet.
Some people wondered what else he might be capable of.
So be careful, Jill, one day he'll shoot you. I wish I'd have said that now.
On August Bank Holiday weekend 2008, Chris Foster murdered his wife Jill and daughter Kirsty before setting fire to his family home. Within 7 days, the police found the remains of their 3 bodies. But to know how Chris and Kirsty died, forensic investigators need to find their skulls.
We took out everything, all 8 feet of debris, by trowel all the way to the floor, to make sure we got as much of Kirsty as we possibly could. We've only got a tiny piece of her skull. It's got an indentation, almost like that, in one corner, which looks like half a bullet hole. What we don't have is the rest of it. Marks on the inside of the skull indicate to the pathologist that it looks like a bullet wound, but it would be nice to find the rest of it, which is why we've taken all the debris that we haven't sifted from here down to a police establishment near Gloucestershire, and that has been sifted to try and find the rest of Kirsty, including that piece of skull.
The forensic team have recovered most of what remains of Jill and Chris Foster, but over half of Kirsty's body is still in the 4 tons of charred rubble taken from where she was found.
Primarily because of the intensity of the fire in that part of the building, just mechanical damage of the stones and bricks and timbers landing on top of the body has caused this extensive fragmentation that we're seeing here.
If the forensic specialists can find any more skull fragments, they might reveal how Chris and Kirsty Foster died.
Yeah.
Two months after the fire, the police pieced together the sequence of events on the night of the 26th of August. As the Fosters returned home from a neighbour's barbecue, this is the last time Jill and Kirsty are seen alive.
We're aware that the Foster family were at that barbecue on that evening. We know they left at about 8:30 p.m. This is them arriving back at 8:44 p.m. Kirsty's getting out of the vehicle now, Jill out of the rear, and walking towards the house, and Foster putting the vehicle away. It looks as if Kirsty's gone over to the kennels there and let the dogs out, and I think they've clearly gone straight round to Mr. Foster, as indeed the little Springer has.
Police believe that neither Jill nor Chris Foster spoke to anyone after they returned home, but teenager Kirsty went upstairs to her bedroom and went online.
We know that Kirsty was engaged in communication via the MSN network with a number of her school friends, and one in particular, a 16-year-old boy. He could see Kirsty on her computer.
With midnight approaching, Chris Foster went upstairs to check on Kirsty.
Around about 11:30, he received a text message to say, "Sorry, Dad's turned the internet off." Kirsty had a further text communication with her friend in response to, "Are you going to go back online?" And the response was, "No, too close to turn it back on, Dad's too close." And the last known communication that Kirsty had with anybody was at 12:15 a.m, where she responded to this friend by texting, "Night night, love you, Kirsty."
Ballistic and forensic specialists painstakingly reconstruct the fire-damaged bodies. It is the last hope of discovering how 15-year-old Kirsty died.
Should we just get a picky of this in the mortuary and then get the other bits out? Yeah. Oh, that's good.
No further fragments of Chris's skull are recovered, but a quarter more of Kirsty's cranium and one tooth have been found.
We've just been looking at the remaining fragments that have been recovered from the room where Kirsty's body was in the house. Those are now the final pieces. We also, whilst we were here, we had a look at the skull fragments to see if there were any more fragments that we could join together. We've joined together a couple more pieces, and now I feel that we've really gone as far as we can with the reconstruction. And unfortunately, we're just going to have to say, at present, it's inconclusive, really.
Without the key fragments of skull, it's not possible to say whether Kirsty or her father Chris were shot or killed by the fire. The 4 tons of sifted rubble are returned to the Foster's Shropshire home by the police. Since they fell out 16 years ago, Chris Foster's younger brother Andrew and his wife Pam have never visited Osbaston House. Until now. Andrew is now responsible for his dead brother's estate.
There's many a time I thought of coming here and knocking the door and saying hello, but said to my wife that I was worried that I would get a shotgun thrust in my face, and that was probably sort of hypothetically or half-heartedly, but I'm glad I didn't. These are the items of Kirsty's bedroom. My holiday in Colin Mauritius. I did lots of swimming and snorkeling, and my dad taught me to dive. I made lots of sandcastles and went water skiing. I'm trying to get to know her. I'm trying to understand, you know, what sort of girl she was. There's a large percentage of Kirsty within this rubble, which they couldn't sift to find, which is very upsetting, but it wasn't quite as it was described to us, so we were shocked when it arrived in this state. You can see some more in that on the side. That looks like a gym skirt. It is. This is anger. Yeah, this is his way of getting back. This is his anger. Nobody's having anything. I'm destroying the lot. Stick 2 fingers up at the world.
Chris Foster's last moments were captured by his own security cameras retrieved from the ruins of the house. At 3:10 in the morning, as he approaches the kennels and stable block, his wife Jill and daughter Kirsty already lay dead in their beds.
The evidence we've gotten from the CCTV shows that someone who carried this out is calm, collected, rational. He's come out with the rifle with the sound moderator attached, and he has a plan in his head and he's carrying it out.
At 3:11, the horses are alive.
But police believe that moments later, Kirsty's horses are shot dead. They do post-mortems to be sure.
The horses' heads were cut off so that we could send them for X-ray to see if there's any bullet tracks through their heads. They did find bullet tracks through the skulls of the horses.
At least one of the horses unfortunately had smoke in his trachea, which indicated it was still alive at the time of the fire.
As this footage progresses, I can then see the dogs walking around the courtyard area.
But out of sight of the camera, the family pets are put back in the kennels and killed.
On the floor here you can see the remains of a blood trail. We believe he's either dragged or carried his dogs across the tarmac here, back towards the stable block. And in the stable block we discovered the bodies of the 3 dogs, along with the 2 horses in this area.
Shot the dogs in the head, shot the horses in the head, shot his wife in the head. There's no distinction there, is there? It's just... Again, it kind of indicates that these classes are all the same.
Foster uses his expertise with fire, which made him millions, to create a funeral pyre. He carries piping into the house to pump 200 litres of oil from his domestic oil tank into the basement of Osbaston House.
It wasn't until we discovered the remains of the hose running round through the gates, following a line here, and physically ending here as it was burnt off at the end. But we believe that it had been passed through the ground floor loo window into the ground floor entrance hall, and has flowed
down the steps into the cellar where it pooled at the bottom.
He sets fire to the stables. The horses, not killed by the bullets, die in the flames. He sets fire to his outbuildings. Jill's doves flutter away in panic.
And as we continue to look at that, you see the fire taking hold. So clearly what's happened is he's set fire to the stable block and then gone over, walked towards the house and set fire to the house.
By 4:11 a.m. the security cameras have shut down. Flames are seen by a neighbour who calls 999.
Yeah, I just phoned the fire service when, other than it's a large house fire.
"7 days before the bank holiday fire, a letter was taped to the front gates at Osbaston House. It signalled the end for Chris Foster and his family.
He knew the bailiffs were coming to repossess that house. Did he suddenly realise the end had come? That Jill didn't know the extent of the problems?
I mean, she wasn't spending money. You know, she wasn't going quite so often to have her face done. But she certainly didn't say to me that, you know, they were in trouble.
In 2004 he was worth 10.4 million on paper. And this is one thing I can't understand is how quickly it all seems to have unravelled and gone wrong. If he had that sort of collateral and property and whatever at that moment in time, what's he done with it all? Where's it all gone?
In 2005, Chris Foster had a dispute with his accountant over unpaid fees. He reported Foster to the Revenue for massive tax evasion.
I think he was bragging. I don't have to pay tax. I'm above the tax, if you like.
Well, he kept saying we've got this fantastic accountant that was doing all his dealings for him. He said Jill and I could claim benefits.
Could claim benefits because we are showing that we're not earning anything.
Bills there from the taxman, tax demands 28,000, nearly 37,000, another 8,600 on there.
To pay the outstanding tax of £750,000, Chris Foster started borrowing from the banks using Osbaston House as security.
Equity release loan, that one's 92,000. Another equity release loan for £90,764. HSBC, 8th of February 2008, 177,000 overdrawn. Again, 20th of September overdrawn, 339,000.
In September 2007, Foster lost his company after a legal dispute with a supplier. It left him with another £1.2 million debt.
I didn't know that Christopher had lost his company and he hadn't worked for 12 months. So that was a big shock.
Chris Foster was in financial meltdown, but he was still addicted to spending.
It's estimated he spent £80,000 on shooting last year alone. 20th and 21st, 22nd of November, 3 days, £6,895. That's a Swiss bank account which is empty. So the difficulties have been going on for some period of time.
I've got a little car, and I can remember saying, God, I'd love to be driving one of your cars. And he said, yeah, but yours is paid for. And I'll never forget him saying, you know, yours is paid for, which obviously meant that his weren't.
Within this pile of paper here, you're talking here debts of over £1 million, easily.
By the end, Chris Foster's total outstanding debt was over £4 million.
On the 21st of August, I know Chris received a text asking him if he was okay. And I've seen the reply, which is from Chris saying, yeah, I'm not good. Things are coming to a head for me soon. That was the last communication.
I get people saying to me, he must have been ill to do what he did. But he was the one that built the problem up, didn't he? He built it up, the situation up, to get to that level. So he created it, and he could have brought it down. He could have stopped himself.
If he'd gone off in the woods and done it to himself, wouldn't have been nice. But to take his wife and child as well is just unforgivable.
There's 3 occasions that we know of that he's talked about suicide following the realisation that things were beginning to collapse around him. He talks to his former business associates about using a gun to shoot himself, but with a plea, can you look after my wife and my daughter?
I understand that Kirsty's horses were considered assets. She'd have gone mad if she was losing her horses. And that, I think, for them, he just could not let it happen to Jill and Kirsty. Full stop.
5 months before the bank holiday weekend, Chris Foster had been prescribed antidepressants by his doctor. On the Friday before he killed his family, he went online and visited a suicide website. Chris Foster owed over £4 million. On August bank holiday weekend 2008, he committed a double murder before setting fire to his £1 million country house, losing his own life in the flames. During the excavation of Chris and Jill Foster's bodies, an extraordinary discovery was made. They were found entwined on their marital bed.
The position of the 2 bodies would indicate they were lying on that bed, and the bed has collapsed through the floor, and we found a lot of the bed springs, the mattress and the bed, curled round the 2 bodies, which we had to cut out before we could move the bodies.
He had started the fire and has gone back upstairs, lay down next to Jill and waited for the smoke and the fire. But they assured me that the smoke would have killed him before the fire got to him. So he went back to be with Jill. That which is Chris. He didn't want to leave her, did he?
Being found next to Jill on the bed, I suppose, shows that there was a certain degree of guilt on his part, and he still felt they were close.
My feeling is that they were a family and he wanted them to go out as a family. He had said they'd been watching the wedding video and that they'd all started to cry. You just wonder whether, at the end, whether Jill did know what was going to happen, or whether it was, just Chris.
The cause of death for Chris, although the skull wasn't intact, the brain was. There was no damage or disruption to the brain at all. Plus the fact it was a long-barreled weapon with a silencer on the end of it as well, which would have made it extremely difficult to put into your mouth. So I think he's succumbed to the smoke which would have been in the room at the time.
There are a number of unanswered questions in relation to that. Did he intend to leave the scene, and did he simply become overcome by the fumes? Did he intend to turn the weapon on himself? And I'm afraid we will not get those answers.
Four months after the fire, the Fosters are laid to rest at their local village church. At Jill's family's request, Chris Foster is buried separately.
There'll be Kirsty and Jill, who will be buried in the same grave, obviously 2 separate coffins. That's 11 o'clock. And then Chris will be buried within the same churchyard at 2:30.
I think what Chris Foster did was the most despicable thing I've ever had to deal with. Chris Foster, as a father, has been put on this planet to protect that girl. She was in her own home, in her own bedroom, with her own parents, the safest place on the world for anybody, and he takes her life. That fills me with horror. To think of Jill and Kirsty as items that I created, I can take them away. That's just too wicked, really.
He'd have never lost our friendship.
No, he wouldn't. He didn't have to go to those lengths. There's always an answer.
If I had been there, would it have made any difference? Andrew said he may have done the same to you, Mummy, who was that desperate.
Just unbelievable to go to such lengths over money. If it is all over money.
Obviously he knew all that had gone on. He kept it to himself, hadn't shared it with anybody, and at that moment, in that photograph, I felt the strain was in his face.
I appreciate how difficult it must be for her to try and accept what's happened and to come to terms with what's happened, so it's going to take time.
I know that Christopher took their lives away, and that was wrong, and that's very difficult to accept. But at the same time, I think he did it because he loved them.
If I do try to discuss any of the aspects of what Chris did, she doesn't really want to discuss it.
You always love your children, whatever they do. Don't cut love off like that because, you know, they've done something horrible. You always love your children, don't you? And you forgive them for whatever they do.